It was a quiet Tuesday morning when Special Agents Elena Carter and Jack Mitchell arrived at a dilapidated house on the outskirts of the small town of Milford. The FBI had received an unusual call, one that piqued their curiosity. The call had come in from a distressed woman, her voice trembling, saying something about a dog begging for help. At first it seemed like a prank. But when the local police couldn't get in touch with the caller again, and no one else in the area had reported anything odd, the FBI had been called in to investigate. The house was far from what the agents had expected. Situated at the end of a long dirt road, surrounded by overgrown weeds and trees that seemed to have seen better days, the house stood like a forgotten relic of the past. Its windows were cracked and the front door was barely hanging on its hinges. "Something feels off," Jack muttered, scanning the area. His hand instinctively rested on the holster of his gun, his eyes darting from the house to the empty fields surrounding them. Elena, ever the calm one, nodded. "We should still be cautious. If there's a chance we can help someone or something, we'll do it." With a determined stride, the agents approached the house, their footsteps crunching against the dry, cracked dirt. They were met with the faint sound of something scratching the door from inside. It was a soft, almost pleading noise. The agents exchanged a glance. "Did you hear that?" Elena asked, her hand reaching for the doorknob. Jack nodded. "Yeah, I heard it too." Slowly, Elena pushed the door open, the creaking of the old wood making them both freeze for a moment. The smell that hit them first was pungent, mildew, decay, and something deeper, almost metallic. Inside the house was dark. A faint ray of light from a broken window illuminated the dusty air, casting shadows that danced eerily along the walls. They stepped carefully into the living room, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of dust. The room was bare except for a few discarded newspapers and empty cans. It looked as though no one had lived here in years. And then, as if on cue, they heard it again, this time louder and more desperate. The sound of claws scraping against wood, accompanied by a low whine. The agents moved towards the source of the noise, which seemed to be coming from a room just down the hall. They paused in front of the door, listening carefully. It was eerily quiet now, save for the faint panting. Elena motioned for Jack to cover the rear while she opened the door. As the door swung wide, their eyes were immediately drawn to the center of the room. A dog, a large German shepherd, was standing there. Its fur was matted and dirty, and it looked thin as though it hadn't eaten in days. But it wasn't just its appearance that caught the agents off guard. It was its posture. The dog wasn't simply sitting there. It was standing on its hind legs, its front paws raised, almost as if it were begging. The animal's eyes were wide and filled with fear, but there was also something else, a pleading look. It stared directly at the agents, almost as if it was trying to communicate with them. "Elena, is that normal?" Jack asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Elena could hardly believe what she was seeing. The dog's behavior was unlike anything she had encountered before. It seemed too intentional, too human-like in its desperation. She stepped forward cautiously, her hand outstretched. "We need to find out what happened here," Elena said, her voice steady, though she couldn't shake the feeling that this case was far from ordinary. As they approached the dog, it let out a low growl, but not one of aggression, more of warning. It then backed up slowly, leading them further into the dark corner of the room. Elena followed the dog, and as she did, she noticed something strange. There, behind a dusty old couch, was a trapdoor in the floor, half open. She looked at Jack, who was already stepping towards her. "What do you think?" he asked, his voice quieter now, as though he too was sensing the gravity of the situation. Elena hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "We need to see where this leads." Together they approached the trapdoor, unaware that what they were about to uncover would send shockwaves through the town, and the entire country. The trapdoor creaked as Elena pulled it open, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down into the unknown. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and something more acrid, like rust and metal. The dog, still standing nearby, let out another soft whine and stepped back, as if urging the agents to proceed. Jack was the first to move, flicking on his flashlight. The beam cut through the oppressive darkness, illuminating the steps below. Elena followed closely behind, both of them trying to ignore the rising tension in their chests. They could feel it in the pit of their stomachs. Whatever lay beneath this house wasn't just an abandoned space, it was something far darker. The stairs creaked under their weight as they descended. Every step seemed to echo in the hollow silence. The basement below was vast, much larger than the agents had anticipated. It was filled with rows of rusted metal shelves, old crates, and stacks of papers scattered across the floor. But what immediately caught their attention was the peculiar, dim light coming from a corner of the room. As they walked towards it, the faint hum of an electrical device became audible. There, in the far corner of the basement, sat a large metal cabinet, its door slightly ajar. The light was coming from inside. It was a strange, sickly green glow that flickered like something alive. Jack took a step forward, his flashlight trained on the cabinet. "Is that?" "Don't touch it," Elena said sharply, but her voice was laced with uncertainty. She had no idea what was inside, but her instincts screamed that it wasn't something they should tamper with just yet. The dog, however, wasn't waiting. It darted past them, its paws echoing on the concrete floor as it trotted to the cabinet. The agents exchanged a confused look as the dog nudged the cabinet's door open wider, revealing something that made both of their hearts skip a beat. Inside the cabinet, secured by thick chains, were several large metallic containers. But it wasn't the containers that made the agents freeze. It was the contents inside. The first container was cracked open slightly, revealing a translucent substance inside, bubbling and shifting as though it was alive. The faint green light seemed to emanate from it, pulsating like a heartbeat. It looked like nothing they had ever seen before. "Is that?" Jack trailed off, unable to form words. Elena moved closer, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the scene. She knelt beside the container and touched it gingerly. The substance inside was warm and she recoiled slightly, unsure of what exactly she was dealing with. It was like nothing from this world, organic but also synthetic. A hybrid of something alien. "What the hell is this?" Jack muttered under his breath. The dog, now visibly agitated, began pacing in front of the cabinet. It stopped abruptly, turned and locked eyes with Elena. There was an urgency in the animal's gaze, something that spoke of terror and helplessness. "That's why the dog is here," Elena said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "It's trying to protect something, or someone." Jack stepped back, his hand moving instinctively to his gun. "Are we dealing with some kind of experiment? This looks like a lab." "I don't know," Elena replied, her mind racing. "But this is beyond what I expected. The woman who called us, did she have any connection to this?" They both turned back towards the stairs, their senses heightened. The only sounds now were the hum of the green light and the dog's low growls as it stood guard. "Maybe she did," Elena said, shaking her head as she remembered the brief details they had about the woman. "She said something about needing help. She didn't say why, just that something bad was going on here." Before they could ponder further, a sudden loud noise echoed from the other end of the basement, causing both agents to freeze. A loud thud, followed by the sound of footsteps. "Someone's coming," Jack whispered urgently. "We need to get out of here. Now." Elena nodded, quickly moving toward the stairs, but not before taking one last look at the glowing containers. She knew they needed answers, but what she had uncovered so far only raised more questions. As they ascended back toward the trapdoor, the dog followed them closely, its eyes never leaving the containers. It knew, better than anyone, that whatever was down there, it was far from the only thing hidden beneath the surface. And it wasn't about to let them leave without the full truth. Elena and Jack barely made it up the stairs when the sound of footsteps grew louder, coming from the direction of the basement door. They moved quickly but cautiously, each step taken with deliberate care, trying to stay as silent as possible. The dog followed them, staying close, its ears pricked as if listening for any signs of danger. At the top of the stairs, Elena motioned for Jack to stop. She peeked through the crack in the door and saw a shadow moving outside, pacing back and forth. Someone was there, and they were clearly expecting someone, or something. "Stay low," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible. "We don't know who it is, but we need to find out." Jack nodded, his hand hovering near his weapon. The tension in the air was palpable, as if something massive was about to break loose. With a steady hand, Elena pushed the door open just enough to slip through, signaling for Jack to follow. They moved quickly but quietly down the hallway, away from the source of the footsteps. The dog remained behind them, its nails clicking on the wooden floors as it trotted along, almost as if it knew they were in danger. The agents reached the front door of the house, but just as they were about to step outside, the door swung open suddenly, and they were met by two men in black suits. Their faces were cold, emotionless, and they didn't speak a word. The air seemed to grow colder as they stepped forward, blocking the agent's path. "Elena, Jack, we've been expecting you," one of the men said in a low, gravelly voice. It was the last thing they expected to hear. These weren't local authorities, nor were they anyone they recognized. Their presence in this house was no coincidence. Something much larger was at play here, and the agents were only just beginning to realize how deep the rabbit hole went. The man who spoke took a step closer, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the agents. "I suggest you come with us. We need to discuss what you found." "Who are you?" Jack demanded, his voice tinged with both confusion and suspicion. He wasn't about to be led away without answers. The second man remained silent, his gaze flicking to the dog, who had positioned itself in front of the agents, as if guarding them from whatever threat these men posed. The first man sighed, clearly growing impatient. "You're asking the wrong questions. It's not about who we are, it's about what you found. You're not in control of this situation anymore." "We are." Elena's mind raced. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Whatever was going on here, whatever this operation was, it was bigger than they had imagined. And now, they were being pulled into something far beyond their understanding. She glanced at Jack, who seemed to be considering his options, but the look in his eyes told her he knew they were out of their depth. They were FBI agents trained to handle situations like this, but the game had just changed. The rules had shifted. Before they could react, the dog let out a low growl, its body stiffening in a protective stance. It bared its teeth at the men, a clear warning. "You've got to be kidding me," Jack muttered under his breath. The first man took another step forward, this time not bothering to hide the threat in his voice. "You'd be wise not to interfere with what you don't understand. The dog, and what it's protecting, it's not your concern." But the dog wasn't backing down. It was snarling now, its eyes locked on the men with a fierce intensity. There was no fear in its gaze, only determination. It was clear that it was willing to do anything to keep them from getting closer to the basement, to the truth that lay hidden beneath the house. Elena stepped forward cautiously, keeping her voice steady despite the rising tension. "I don't know who you are or what you're involved in, but you'll answer to us. We won't let you get away with whatever this is." The second man finally spoke, his voice colder than before. "You don't have a choice. We've already seen what you've uncovered, and now, it's time for you to leave." But just as the man finished speaking, the sound of sirens wailed in the distance. The noise grew louder, echoing through the quiet countryside, growing closer by the second. The agents' heads turned instinctively toward the noise. The men froze for a split second, clearly thrown off by the unexpected interruption. It was the perfect moment for Elena to make her move. She didn't hesitate. With a swift motion, she grabbed Jack's arm and yanked him toward the door. The dog, sensing their sudden decision to escape, bolted forward, leading the way as they sprinted out of the house and into the open field beyond. Behind them, the men cursed under their breath, their voices growing fainter as the agents disappeared into the distance. But Elena knew this wasn't over. They had just opened the door to something much bigger than they could have imagined. Something far more dangerous than they had ever anticipated. And the worst part? The truth was still out there, waiting to be uncovered. The dog, however, wasn't done yet. It turned back one last time, its gaze locked on the agents as if saying, "Asterisk, you haven't seen the full picture yet. There's more. Much more to this story, asterisk." The agents ran without looking back, their breaths heavy in the cold air, the dog trailing closely behind them. They didn't slow down until they reached the safety of the nearby forest, just outside the range of the men in black suits. Elena glanced around, scanning the woods for any sign of pursuit. Jack was already checking his phone, trying to contact the local police, but there was no signal, no surprise in a place so remote. "Damn it," Jack muttered. "We're cut off." "We need to think," Elena said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "We can't just rush into this. We need information, a plan. There's no telling who those men were, but they know about us, and they know we've uncovered something." The dog, which had stopped to catch its breath, now looked up at them with an expression that seemed almost knowing. It was panting heavily but standing tall, its alertness unwavering. "They're not just after us," Elena continued, her eyes narrowing as the pieces began to fall into place. "This has to do with what's in that basement. The containers, the green substance, whatever it is, it's important to them. They're willing to do whatever it takes to keep it a secret." Jack nodded, still trying to shake off the surprise of the encounter. "It's bigger than we thought. This isn't just some local issue. Those men were part of something organized and dangerous." Elena looked at the dog, who had been strangely calm amidst all the chaos. "But why did it lead us to the basement? Why was it so desperate to get us there?" Jack ran a hand through his hair, thinking it over. Maybe it wasn't just trying to warn us. Maybe it needed us to understand what was down there, something that would make us act. Elena's mind raced, trying to connect the dots. The dog might be more than we think. It's clearly been involved with whatever operation was going on in that house. But it also has a connection to whatever's hidden beneath the floor. A rustling sound from behind them broke their concentration. The agents immediately tensed, their hands going to their weapons as they turned toward the source. The dog growled softly, its hackles raised, but it stayed by their side, unwavering. Out of the trees stepped a figure, a woman tall and slender, dressed in dark clothing. She walked with the same calm but purposeful stride the agents had seen in the men from earlier, but there was no weapon in her hand. Her eyes locked on the dog and it immediately stopped growling, its body relaxing in a way that suggested familiarity. "Who are you?" Elena demanded, her hand still on her gun. The woman raised her hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to hurt you," she said, her voice soft yet firm. "I'm here to help." Jack's brow furrowed. "Help? After everything that just happened?" The woman nodded. "Yes. What you found is part of something much larger. I know what it is and I know what's coming. But you need to understand that you're not alone in this. The dog, he's been trying to protect you." Elena looked at the dog, then back at the woman. "This dog isn't just a regular animal, is it?" The woman shook her head. "No. He's part of a project, an experiment. A project that was designed to protect something very dangerous. That green substance you saw? It's not from this world. And the people you encountered, the ones in black suits, they've been trying to harness its power for years. But there's a problem. It's alive. And it doesn't want to be controlled." Jack narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean it's alive? The substance?" The woman sighed, her gaze growing distant. "Yes. The substance inside those containers? It's a living organism, something created in a lab, something that shouldn't exist. But it's not just any organism. It's sentient. It can think. It can feel." Elena's heart raced as she processed the woman's words. "Are you telling us that, whatever this is, it's conscious?" The woman nodded grimly. "Exactly. And the dog, he's part of its defense system. The project involved not only creating the substance but also modifying animals to protect it. The dog, the one you met, is one of the few left. The rest were destroyed or went rogue." Jack stared at the dog, his mind racing. "So the dog was trying to keep us from uncovering the truth?" The woman shook her head. "No. It was trying to make sure you understood the danger. The truth is that there are people out there who will stop at nothing to get their hands on that substance. And if they do, it could change everything." Elena took a step forward, her eyes narrowed with determination. "And you? Who are you in all this?" The woman hesitated before answering. "I was part of the project. I helped create the substance, but I left when I realized the danger it posed. I'm here now because I can help you stop them. But we don't have much time. They know you're onto them. They won't stop until they silence you, and anyone who knows about this." Elena exchanged a look with Jack. They were in deep. But one thing was clear, the stakes had just been raised. The battle wasn't just about exposing the truth anymore, it was about preventing a catastrophe. The woman turned toward the dog. "Come on, boy," she said softly. "We've got work to do." And with that, they began to walk deeper into the forest, their path uncertain, but their mission clearer than ever. The fight for the truth had only just begun. The dense forest around them seemed to close in, each step taking the agents further from the safety of civilization. The woman, whose name they learned was Dr. Leah Hayes, led them down a narrow trail, her pace steady and purposeful, as though she had walked this path many times before. The dog trotted beside her, ever watchful, its eyes scanning the surroundings as if it, too, understood the gravity of the situation. Elena and Jack had no choice but to follow. There were too many questions, too many unknowns, and too few answers. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered, but the more they learned, the more they realized just how little they knew. "Where are we going?" Jack asked, his voice filled with a mix of wariness and curiosity. "What do you expect to find out here?" Dr. Hayes didn't stop walking, but she turned her head slightly to answer. "We're going to a safe house, somewhere they won't think to look for us. We need to regroup and figure out our next move." "Safe house?" Elena repeated, her tone skeptical. "Who exactly are they that we're hiding from?" "The same people who want to control the substance," Dr. Hayes replied. "They've infiltrated several organizations, including government agencies, and they won't hesitate to silence anyone who stands in their way. They've been after the substance for years. What you found in that basement, it's the key to their plans." Elena felt the weight of Dr. Hayes' words pressing down on her. The more she heard, the clearer it became that the mission they had stumbled into was far bigger than they could have ever imagined. This wasn't just a local case anymore. It was a global conspiracy, and the stakes were higher than they realized. The forest gradually began to thin out, revealing a secluded clearing with an old rusted cabin at its center. It looked abandoned at first glance, but there was something about it, something familiar, that made Elena pause. She wasn't sure what it was, but her instincts told her this place had history. Dr. Hayes walked up to the cabin's door and knocked 3 times. There was a long pause before the door creaked open, revealing a tall man in his mid-30s, dressed in military-grade gear. His eyes scanned them quickly before settling on the dog, who was now standing at the foot of the stairs, tail stiff. "Leah, you're back," the man said, his voice gruff but welcoming. "I see you brought friends." "More like allies," Dr. Hayes replied. She motioned for Elena and Jack to step forward. "This is Agent Elena Carter and Agent Jack Mitchell. They've uncovered part of the truth about the substance and now they're in danger." The man nodded gravely. "Come inside quickly." Once inside, the agents were struck by how different the cabin was from the outside. It was a safe house in every sense, secure, fortified, and well-equipped. Maps were tacked to the walls, and various electronic devices hummed softly in the background. It looked like a base of operations. "Who are you?" Jack asked the man, still trying to understand the full scope of this situation. "My name is Noah," the man replied. "I used to work for the same organization that Leah did. I was one of the few who realized what was really going on. Now I work to stop them." Elena's mind raced as she took in the information. "You're all part of this project. The one that created the substance?" Dr. Hayes nodded. "Yes. We were part of a covert operation to create an organism that could harness extraordinary energy that could change the world. But things went wrong. The substance became more than just a project. It became a living entity, something far more complex than we ever anticipated." "And the dog?" Jack asked. "How does it fit into all of this?" Dr. Hayes glanced at the dog, who was now sitting calmly by the fire, as though it had done this many times before. "The dog is a modified animal, one of many. When we realized the organism was sentient, we knew we needed a way to protect it. The dog was part of a genetic program designed to create guardians for the substance." The revelation hit like a cold wave. The dog wasn't just a companion or a pet. It was a key player in this mysterious operation, tied to the very survival of something beyond human understanding. "The modifications we made to animals weren't just about creating protectors," Leah continued. "They were also about creating connections. The dog shares a bond with the substance. It can sense its condition, its emotions, and it knows when someone is getting too close." Elena exchanged a glance with Jack. "So the dog wasn't trying to hurt us. It was trying to protect us from the truth?" Noah nodded. "Exactly. The project wasn't just about creating an energy source. It was about controlling something that could give unimaginable power to whoever held it. The people who you encountered, those men in black suits, are part of a group that wants to weaponize it." Jack clenched his jaw. "So now we're in a race to stop them before they take control of this thing?" "Yes," Dr. Hayes said firmly. "But it's not just about stopping them. It's about understanding the substance. The truth is, we don't fully know what it's capable of. The only way to stop them is to figure out how to control it, how to prevent it from being used against us." Noah stepped forward, pulling out a series of documents from a folder. "We've been tracking their movements for years. They're closing in on the location of the last known stash of the substance. If they find it before we do, it's over." Elena's pulse quickened. "Where is it?" Noah handed her a map, pointing to a marked location deep in the mountains. "It's there. We're going to need to move fast. They're already on their way." As the team prepared to leave the safe house, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. They had uncovered so many secrets, but the more they learned, the clearer it became. The truth was far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. And time was running out. The dog stood at the door waiting for them, its eyes gleaming with determination. It knew what was at stake, and it would do whatever it took to protect them. Together, they headed into the unknown, the weight of their mission pressing on their shoulders, knowing that they were about to face their greatest challenge yet. The air was thick with tension as Elena, Jack, Dr. Hayes, Noah, and the dog made their way through the dense forest, heading toward the mountains. The gravity of their mission weighed heavily on them, but there was no turning back now. They had uncovered too much, and now the fight wasn't just for the truth, it was for the survival of everything they knew. The map had led them to a remote location, deep within the forest, hidden from prying eyes. But Elena had a sinking feeling in her gut. They weren't just racing against time, they were racing against enemies who had been planning this for years. And in a game like this, there was no guarantee they would make it out alive. As they walked, Elena couldn't help but glance at the dog who was still ahead of them, its nose twitching, ears perked. It was a silent sentinel, constantly alert. She had seen the bond it shared with the substance. If anyone could sense danger, it was this dog. It had been their guide, their protector, but in a way, it had also been the key to unlocking the terrifying truth. "What exactly are we going to do when we get there?" Jack asked, his voice low as he kept an eye on their surroundings. Dr. Hayes, who had been leading the way, glanced back at him. "We need to find the substance before they do. If we can get to it first, we may be able to contain it, or at least prevent them from using it." Noah, his expression darkening, added, "The people we're up against aren't just interested in controlling it, they want to weaponize it. If they succeed, they'll have power like no one has ever known. It will change the balance of the world in ways we can't even imagine." The dog growled quietly, its stance shifting as it turned to face them, as if warning them of an impending danger. Elena's heart skipped a beat. She knew it wasn't just reacting to the environment, it was reacting to something more. And then they heard it. A low hum in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. The unmistakable sound of helicopters. "They found us," Noah muttered under his breath. Elena's pulse raced. How did they know where we were? Dr. Hayes gritted her teeth. "They've been tracking us. They probably have satellites on us, listening devices. They know everything." "Then we need to move faster," Jack said, pushing forward. "No more detours. We go straight to the location and secure it." The dog, now visibly agitated, took off in the direction of the sound, its movements swift and precise. It knew the urgency of the situation. Elena's instincts kicked in and she followed the dog without hesitation, with Jack and the others hot on her heels. The closer they got to the marked location, the more the atmosphere seemed to change. The trees grew sparser and the ground became uneven. The hum of the helicopters grew louder, their shadows casting across the terrain as they circled above, waiting for the right moment to strike. They reached the clearing and before them stood a cave entrance, hidden by a thick curtain of ivy barely visible unless you knew where to look. Elena's heart raced as she glanced around. This was it. Dr. Hayes stepped forward, brushing aside the vines with trembling hands. "It's in here," she said quietly. The dog sniffed the ground, its body tense. It was now fully alert, its instincts warning it of the danger ahead. The group entered the cave, the darkness swallowing them as they ventured deeper into the earth. The air inside the cave was damp, the walls lined with strange symbols that seemed to pulse with energy. At the far end of the cave they saw it, large metallic containers, some cracked open, others sealed tight. The green substance inside was glowing faintly, almost like it was alive. Elena's breath caught in her throat. The truth was before her now, and it was both beautiful and terrifying. "We need to secure it," Noah said, his voice tight with urgency. But before they could make their move, the sound of boots echoed behind them. The men in black suits had arrived. "Elena, Jack, Dr. Hayes. You shouldn't have come here," one of the men said, his voice cold and emotionless. The agent spun around, guns raised. There were at least 5 of them, all armed, and they moved with military precision. Behind them, a helicopter hovered just outside the cave's entrance, its blades whirring loudly in the otherwise silent air. Elena's mind raced. This was it. This was the moment that would determine everything. "We're not leaving without the substance," Elena said firmly, her voice unwavering. "And you won't stop us." The man in the front smiled, a chilling expression. "You don't understand. You never have." Without warning, he pressed a button on his wrist, and the ground beneath them seemed to tremble. The walls of the cave cracked, dust falling from the ceiling. It wasn't just the men who had control, the substance had been waiting for this moment. The dog, sensing the shift in the air, leaped forward, its body glowing with energy. It howled, and for the first time, Elena saw it in its full form. A guardian not just of the substance but of everything that was at stake. The men hesitated, looking uncertain as the dog's presence seemed to disrupt their plans. They had underestimated the connection between the dog and the organism. In the chaos, Dr. Hayes shouted, "Elena, Jack, now. We can contain it." Without another word, Elena and Jack rushed to the containers. They worked quickly, using the tools Dr. Hayes had provided them to seal the substance in a protective case. The air around them was charged with electricity, the energy from the substance rippling through the cave. The men tried to move toward them, but the dog stood between them, a fierce protector, its growls reverberating off the cave walls. The agents, realizing they were losing control, retreated, backing away slowly. "We'll be back," one of the men called out, their voices full of menace. But it was too late. Elena and Jack had done it. They had secured the substance and with it, the key to stopping the global threat that had been set in motion. The helicopter began to pull away, the sound of its blades fading into the distance as the agents stood victorious, but weary. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. As they emerged from the cave, the sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft light over the forest. The dog stood beside them, its eyes watching the horizon, as if guarding them from the unknown future ahead. Elena took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything they had just uncovered. The journey wasn't over. But for now they had won. And that in itself was enough.